Afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our bi-monthly Bridge Culture Club. Today we're discussing Tin Camp Road by Ellen Airgood. Today's event is hosted by Bridge, Michigan. So you'll see myself and Amber on the call as Bridge staff members. Thank you all for joining us today. In case you aren't familiar with us, Bridge, Michigan is Michigan's nonprofit, nonpartisan news source covering issues that matter to you and your community. You can subscribe for free at bridgemi.com. Also, those who are current Bridge Club members, people who have donated to Bridge over the past year, can get a number of benefits, including access to a free electronic copy of each Bridge Culture Club selection. You can become a member today by visiting the link we will drop into the chat in just a moment. But for today, we're so lucky to be joined by author and Michigander Ellen Airgood, who you see here. I'll give a full introduction of her momentarily, but we're incredibly honored that she was willing to join us for a discussion of her novel. The schedule for today's discussion is this. I'll give an introduction of Ellen Airgood, and then I'll hand it over to Amber to lead the discussion with Ellen about the book for about 40 minutes. Then we'll take reader questions for the author, which you can type your questions into the chat at any time for us to collect. Then we'll conclude at 1 p.m. We will be recording this discussion, and we will be posting it on the recording on Bridge's website, www.bridgemi.com. But for now, I would like to introduce Ellen Airgood. Ellen Airgood grew up on a farm in Michigan's Thumb, where her favorite things to do were read books, ride horses, swing in her tire swing, and write stories. She almost left the University of Michigan after her first year to go back home and farm, but did return to school after her parents offered to co-sign the loan for the new fencing she'd need to raise beef cattle on their 80 acres, the only crop they considered feasible. She was a vegetarian at the time. She graduated with a Bachelor's of Science from the School of Natural Resources and Environment and now lives on the shore of Lake Superior in the Upper Peninsula, where she writes and owns a small coffee shop / micro bakery out of a food truck. You can find that The Ugly Fish Baking Co., along with her husband. She's the author of 4 novels, Tin Camp Road, which was chosen as the Library of Congress's Great Reads from Great Places, Michigan selection for 2023, Michigan Notable Book and Midwest bestseller, South of Superior, which was also featured on National Public Radio's Radio Reader, the award-winning Prairie Evers, a Bank Street best book for middle grade readers, and The Education of Ivy Blake, a companion book to Prairie Evers. Her work also appears in The Way North, New Upper Peninsula Writings from Wayne State University Press, Here, Women Writing on Michigan's Upper Peninsula from Michigan State University Press, and Bob Seeger's House, also from Wayne State University Press. Without further ado, I will hand this over to Amber so that we can begin the discussion.
Thanks so much, Jackie. And Ellen, thank you for being here. We are so honored that you're willing to join Bridge Culture Club's event today. We love Tin Camp Road, and we're really excited to talk with you about it.
Oh, thanks for having me. I'm really happy to be here.
Fantastic. Well, my first question is one that I ask a lot of authors when we do these Culture Club events. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your history as a Michigan resident to start?
Sure. I grew up in the Thumb, so a lot of people will be familiar with that. My parents had a small farm, and I had just almost an idyllic childhood. Looking back, I'm just so grateful. My parents were both readers, so books were part of my life for as long as I can remember. We didn't have a television until I was like 12. So we read maybe more than ever. Plus I love to be outside. My grandparents lived around the corner and they had a TV. So it's not like we were unexposed to it, but I do think it probably helped me make me more of a reader. Although also it helped me make me more of a misfit, which I very much felt a lot of the time in school. I remember pretending in grade school that I had seen the popular shows the other kids had seen because I wanted to fit in better. And it never worked. If you haven't seen a show, like totally don't pretend that you saw it. You're going to look like an idiot. In 4th grade, I had always loved to read. I mean, I love to read, but my fourth grade teacher, Mrs. Nora Keebler, she gave us a lot of creative writing assignments. And I really have to say that's when it hit me that I wanted to be a writer. I was hooked. I had it took her assignments and that practice of like trying to make your own story to make me realize or understand something I never had before, which is all those books I like to read, which were like these little magic boxes. You know, you opened them up and you were wherever the story was with these people that you just, it was so exciting, but I never really thought it through. But when she started assigning stories, I realized some person wrote them, and I wanted to be one of those people. So that never went away. Um, I also wanted to be a musician. I wanted to be, I thought when I was a little girl, I thought I'd be a blacksmith. My dad was a school teacher and a blacksmith, so I figured I would probably be a blacksmith. I loved to go with him. He was actually a farrier, which is a little different from a blacksmith. He shod horses. So I would go with him, you know, rattling around in the truck. I would turn the crank on the forge as he beat the shoes into shape. And I loved it. I loved growing up on the farm. I wanted to be a farmer in a way, but as Jackie read in the bio, the realities of that were different than how it seemed in my mind. Um, Both my parents, my mom was a nurse. She loved her vocation. My dad was a teacher, and yeah, I don't know. I think I'm going on too long, but that's a little bit of my life as a Michigander. I had a very happy life in Lower Michigan on a small farm, raised by two great parents who liked to read. And I had some good teachers that encouraged me to keep writing. And it was a dream that I had in my heart forever, but I didn't think it was practical in a lot of ways. And I also loved to be outside, and I loved music. And it was hard to decide if I would study music or if I would study maybe forestry. But in the end, I ended up in the School of Natural Resources, and I have a bachelor's of science, and I'm so glad I did that. It led me to really interesting places. It's a great program. But all along, no matter what else I did, I wanted to be a writer. And then I had this whirlwind romance with this guy I met in the UP who turned out to own a little cafe. And like within 6 months of meeting him, I had married him and moved up here, and here I am, still here. And it's been a very interesting life. It's been very challenging in a lot of ways. And I love it here. I love the UP. And I think that it's given me a lot to write about. Yeah. Okay. That's enough on that. I'm rambling.
No, not at all. It was so interesting to hear you describe all of these different interests and dreams and sort of how that was cultivated, because I felt like I could remember themes from Tin Camp Road that fit into so many of those dreams. So thank you so much for sharing that. You're sort of talking about what brought you to the UP brings me to my first question that I have for you, is that one thing that struck me immediately as I was reading Tin Camp Road is that you really give the reader a sense of sort of the beauty and the vastness of the Upper Peninsula. How did you sort of set out to give the reader the understanding of the UP, even if they'd never been there or weren't familiar with it at all?
Um, I think a sense of place is one of the main things about me as a person. Like I loved the farm where I grew up. I loved my life there. I mean, I had all the challenges and idiocies of any, you know, like teenager and yada yada, but I truly loved the farm and I loved our life there. And it was hard. It was so hard to let go. Um, it was so hard to go to college, even though I was a great student and I wanted to go to college and it was exciting to go to Ann Arbor and I loved it. But at the same time, I was homesick, and that sense of place was just ingrained in me. And when I moved to the UP, I fell in love with the UP. I fell in love with the UP in junior high. I made a trip with my girlfriend's family. They had a cabin in Curtis on a little lake. And it was just a revelation to me. It was like something out of a storybook. They were right on a little inland lake, and they had a little rowboat we could play with. And the neighbors had a sheepdog named Love. And there was a cook wood stove in the kitchen, and it was crazy, man. It was great. And it was the UP. And every time I came to the UP, I loved it. And I wanted to be up here. And a year before I met my husband, I remember telling a girlfriend, I'm going to move here. And I equated it very much with writing. I think I had very romantic and naive ideas that being in such a place would make it easier or easy even, and that was wrong, to be a writer. But we all operate on romantic ideas that turn out to be quite wrong. But so I love the UP, and conveying a sense of place was important to me. The first book that I published, South of Superior, it very much came out of a yearning to share the UP with people who'd never been here or might never be here. I wanted to try to show people what I loved about it so much. It's such a rare spot, and maybe with rare people, I'm not sure they build them like that anymore, was how I felt. They probably do. But I'm like, man, these people around me are just, they're amazing, especially very elderly people. I had the good fortune to run a restaurant, and it was good fortune, bad fortune. A restaurant is a hell of a lot of work. It will eat you alive in no uncertain terms, but at the same time, it will give you so much. And it brought me so many people and made me a part of the community in a way I would not have ever been on my own. I'm kind of a loner in a way. I mean, I love people, but I'm very quiet. I'm introspective. I like to read. How was I going to be part of a community, really? You know? So I met all these people, these local people who were, I mean, of all ages, but these older people were just astounding to me. So I wanted to share them in that book. And another thing I wanted to share in that book was Superior. Lake Superior just is awesome. It's so awesome. So if I had, I don't consider myself a very good writer, but I'm hardworking, and I'm very conscientious, and I'm very devoted, and I'm stubborn, and I will finish. I will finish, which is a lot of the battle, I think. There are a lot of writers who are better than me who don't finish, you know, so you got to finish stuff, and I can make stuff better. I always thought, you know, this isn't great, but you can make it better. If I had anything special to write about or add to the book that would make the book unique for people, it was Lake Superior. And I wanted to make the lake a character. I worked at that. And so when I wrote Tin Camp Road, I think earlier drafts didn't really share the UP in the way the final book did, because I had kind of already done that. And I've been here so long that I forgot how to see it and share it with you. But an early reader was like, where's the UP, man? And so I went back through the story, and I'm like, yeah, you're right. And so I made a whole revision of its own to try to think of the things that make the UP particular, special, unique.
That's so interesting. Have you noticed when readers talk to you about their experience of reading the book, is the reaction of people who are from the UP or even from Michigan different from people in other places, or are they similar?
That's a good question. I would say that by and large, people from the UP might understand and like the book most easily. And you never know where all your readers are from. I think people from the Midwest might understand the book a little more easily. I think people who've struggled or been single parents seem to understand the book more easily. It seemed like people have either a love or hate relationship with the book. I was surprised at how many people couldn't even finish the book because they were so angry at Laurel. And I was like, wow, okay. You know, and that's fine. I'm pretty not defensive about my own work. I try really hard to be separate from it, and everybody brings themselves. And when you write a book, no matter how hard you try, you can convey ideas that you didn't necessarily mean to. You can only bring yourself to, and you can fail to convey things that you really wanted to, no matter how hard you try. So to me, I'm very fond of Laurel, the Sky's mom. And I have so much sympathy for her, even as I see she makes some very dicey decisions. But sometimes life really puts you on the spot and you do the best you can. So I can't imagine hating her, but I found that a lot of readers did. So, okay, that's fine.
Yeah.
But in general, I think because I worked so hard to show the UP, I wanted to show the UP in a more realistic way than in South of Superior. Not that South of Superior was unrealistic exactly, but maybe there were more rose-colored lenses on for that one. And I think a lot of people who've managed to live here have seen a lot of hard times because it's not an easy place to make it.
Sure. Absolutely. Well, I actually have a couple of questions about Laurel and Sky because I really related to Laurel a lot. I have a young daughter myself, and some of the decisions that she was needing to make just felt so real and very familiar to me. So, one of my kind of first questions that came to mind as I was reading is that it just seemed to me that Laurel and Sky have just such like a relationship of unconditional love, as is often the case within families. Um, what did you hope that readers understood about their relationship and sort of Laurel's work to be the best parent that she can to Sky?
I really hoped that people would understand that Laurel loved Sky so much and that it was as close to a really perfect love as you're ever going to get as a human. She wanted so much to do what was very best for Sky. She was always trying to do that as best she could from within the framework of her own self. I mean, we got to drag ourselves around with us and all our baggage, and we can't see what we can't see, but she was always looking at herself and trying so hard and trying to understand her own beliefs and she wanted to give Sky the best childhood, the best grounding to march forward into life, and I wanted people to see that even if they didn't agree with her decisions. I wanted to see that her love was really, really true, and that I wanted them to think that it worked too, because Sky was so loving in return and she was so confident, so that all of Laurel's efforts, their love was the most important thing about their life, and that she succeeded. Even before she grew a little, she was succeeding because Sky was awesome. And that awesomeness didn't just come from nowhere.
Right. Absolutely. One thing that Tin Camp Road really demonstrates to the reader is sort of the importance of family, both your given family and your chosen family.
Mm-hmm.
How, as you were writing, like I definitely saw sort of a change in Laurel and her understanding of who her family and her community are, and sort of like sort of a growth in that understanding. How did you lay that out? Like, did you always know that was the course the story was on? And what were you showing us there?
That's a great question. Oh, this book, it nearly killed me. I say that lightly, but the process of writing it was a hot mess. South of Superior came out first and it did quite well. And it was my first book. And I worked on it for years, and it was also a hot mess for the longest time. It took me about 7 years to write it. I really did not know how to write it. I probably did at least 12 or 15 or 20 major revisions, top to bottom. So, and then I had this happy, and it was happy, don't get me wrong, this happy event, this happy ending where I published a novel with a major publisher to a fair amount of acclaim. It was wonderful. And I would not undo it. But at the same time, as with anything in life, it's complicated. Because before that, I was the pizza girl, man. I did not really talk too much about my dreams of writing or my effort to write and so on. So, and I was an amateur. And the wonderful thing about being an amateur is the world is your oyster. There was this terrible wish and desire to publish. But at the same time, you don't know what you don't know. I had no idea how freeing it was to just be an amateur. And then once I published South the Superior, and I was just stunned by how much people liked it, and I'm grateful. I was also suddenly like, there was a lot of pressure to produce another book quickly that people would like just as well. Oh my gosh. I crashed and burned for a long time, and it wasn't fun. So writing Tin Camp Road was a big job. And it's such a big job, I don't even remember now. Oh, Laurel's story arc. Did I know it from the beginning? Oh, heck no. I didn't really. It was a desperate grab at a story. It took so long to get to know Laurel. She's actually quite self-protected. I got to know Sky really fast, and she's so open and fun, she's so creative and spunky. But Laurel, like, who the heck was this young woman? So it wasn't obvious, but in any piece of fiction, at least any piece of fiction that I'm going to write, because I'm not, I hope good stories, but fairly simple, really. There's going to be a beginning, a middle, and an end that you're going to recognize, and there's going to be a character arc of change. So what changes did this young woman need to make? So I spent years thinking about it.
Well, it's just I just thought her arc was so interesting and effective. You can see sort of the seeds that you're planting along the way for her arc for growth and setting boundaries and understanding her community, being willing to ask for help. But so you don't see, you see those being planted along the way, but it doesn't fully pay off until, she finally sort of makes that change. So I found it very effective and
Well, thank you, because I'll tell you, that means a lot to me, because it was a struggle, man. If you could see all the iterations and all the scenes and all the versions of the book and all the things that happened that actually didn't end up in, it was work. But that's, so I'm glad it worked out for you. Yes, thank you.
Absolutely. And I think a lot of our readers, I can see in the comments, a lot of folks talking about the way that they understood the characters and what they learned and sort of their journey of reading it. So it sounds like it was really meaningful for a lot of folks here. I have of course, I have a few questions. We have a lot of ones from the chat. So eventually I'll turn the page there. So if you're typing in your questions, we're taking them down, and we'll turn to them in just a moment. You've mentioned so far some of your other books, but how is Tin Camp Road similar to other books that you've written? In what ways is it different?
That's a tough question. I think it's similar in that it seems like I write characters who are 10 or so years old pretty easily. And so Prairie Evers, The Education of Ivy Blake, those are both middle grade novels that I wrote. Prairie and Ivy are 10-year-old, 11-year-old girls. Sky is 10. In South of Superior, there's a little boy named Grayson who's like probably 10, 8, 9, 10. I can't, he changes age in the book. I think that age for me personally was a great era of my life. So maybe I'm able to tap into that and remember it well or feel it well. For Tin Camp Road, I really wanted it to be a page turner in some ways. I wanted it to make you need to know what was going to happen to these two. Whatever will become of them. I wanted, in a way, almost in a quiet way, and I hope this doesn't sound weird, but I wanted it to be a thriller in a way that you couldn't put it down until you knew whether they were going to be okay or not. And I don't think I ever approached any other book that I wrote in that way. I feel like it's a bit more mature than the other books that I wrote, and maybe in between South of Superior And Tin Camp Road, I spent several years on a book that never got beyond a box in my garage. It didn't really work. It really didn't work. Really, really didn't work. But my brother read it for me, and he had a couple hard questions. I remember him leafing through it over the phone, and he was like, so I really liked the scene at the swimming pool. That was nice. And I'm like, great. That like took 2 pages out of the 350 pages that I sent him. Then he said, but the book is so dark. It's so dark. He's like, it's hard to read. It's so dark. And then he said, and the other thing is, can you tell me what it's about? And that was the clincher. I mean, I probably might have kept working on it had it been dark, but it was about something, but that it was so dark and was about nothing was just terrible. I had to call my editor and say, I'm going to be years late on my contract because I just spent 3 years on a book that isn't going to work. But so I did not want Tin Camp Road to be dark in that way. I don't personally like to read books that are unrelentingly dark. A lot of people do. I don't. I just can't do it. Life is hard enough for me. I have my own struggles with my mood, my outlook. I really want to keep going. So I'm very careful about what I read and do and how it makes me feel. So, but I wanted it to be smart, but hopeful. But it is darker, I think. It's a little more closer to the bone than other books I wrote.
Yeah. Are any of, obviously, your books are works of fiction, but are any of the characters familiar, based on, or just, somewhat, have you taken any pieces of real people in your life and had them play a part in any of your books?
Yeah, I'm sure I have. I think every writer does, but they become themselves. In South of Superior, if you were from Grand Marais, where I worked for so long before we sold our diner and started the smaller business, people read it and were just sure they knew who everybody was, which really, I had worked so hard to make these people up, but there are a lot of amalgams of the kind of people that I knew. And in South of Superior, there's a guy, he owns a pizza shop. His name's Paul. If I was anybody in that book, I was Paul, the pizza guy, which would surprise readers because, he's a guy. I'm like, yeah, well, still. In Tin Camp Road, I've known a lot of awesome young mothers in my time up here, and it's not like this character is based on any one of them, but definitely an amalgam of the kind of love I see for these women who are often enough single, not always, and fathers too. I don't mean it that way, but a lot of times it was women that I knew. Other than that, in this book, they're all amalgams. There's not someone specific I can point to. In Tin Camp, in South of Superior, there was one character who was very much based on a real person. The fruit man, George, in our town, was very like a fruit man in the book, which I told George, and that was fine. Anyway, yes, I'm sure all writers need to take, characteristics of the kind of people that interest you. You're going to try to turn them into fiction. But once you start to write, the book has its own needs, and the characters become very unique, at least in the process as I do it.
Makes sense. You've talked a little bit about sort of your business, your coffee shop and microbrewery or micro bakery,
Cookies.
and sort of how how that plays a role in your life, and previously your ownership of the diner with your husband. How do you balance both, being a business owner and a writer?
I don't know. It's been a real struggle. Really, really, really. That's probably, I mean, no, that's not right either. I was going to say that's probably why South of Superior took me 7 years to write. And it's part of it. After I published South of Superior, we started closing in the winter because I wanted the winters to write. And I just thought, oh, now with all this time, it's going to be so easy. But that's where I skidded right into a complete disaster With more time, it was not so easy, not at all. So like the diner and the bakery, they give me so much. They give me so many people. They give me so much just as a person, you know, like a family, like friendships, like a purpose and just activity, you know. You never know, as a small business person, you never know what each day will bring. We used to have a friend who was a commercial fisherman, and we were talking one time. He's like, I think that's what's so addictive about fishing. You never know what you are going to catch, you know, and you're out on the water in your own boat doing your own thing, and you may or may not have a haul today. And I think a lot of small businesses are like that. So, but it takes a lot too. The food business is brutal. So, you know, you're working these crazy hours, and balance has been something I very much wanted, haven't known how to find. So balancing it is still tough. Good question. I think you just have to live with what you've got. There is no ideal writing life, you know, and it
Yeah,
turned out that having more time wasn't the magic ticket. So,
fair enough. One thing that I've been interested to learn as I've talked to some authors as part of the Michigan or the Bridge Culture Club series is that sometimes folks are been approached to turn their book into a screenplay or
uh,
bring their characters to the big or small screen. Has that been part of? Has anyone approached you about wanting to bring Laurel or
uh,
Sky or any of your characters?
no, that would be so interesting. No, they haven't. Um, but maybe it'll happen someday. I guess you never
Maybe
know.
someday. That'd be
Yeah,
very cool. Well,
yeah.
this is
I
a
think
reader
it could
question.
be. I think it would be fascinating. I think you would have to be very flexible within yourself, because once something transitions from a book to a movie, usually I think they change a lot, you know,
Mhm.
and it's no longer yours. And I mean, it would be interesting. Yeah.
Definitely. I just saw a reader question pop into the chat here. I'll switch to those in a moment, but I'm just curious because it's sort of similar. Someone wanted to know whether you ever intend to do a sequel to or bring these characters into another book.
Oh, that's a great question. I would never say never. You just don't know. But in general, I would say I don't think I'm a very sequel-y person. Um, a lot of times I don't care for sequels to books as much as I liked the original. Um, and I think that might carry over to how I would feel writing them. However, I mean, I don't know that I would ever be able to do it, but there's a character in South of Superior, Gladys, an older lady. I would love to write a prequel
Mm,
about Gladys, you know, but that's just in my head. Whether I would ever do it, I don't know.
that's fair. Fair enough. Speaking of, things you're working on, can you tell us about if you're working on anything new at the moment?
Yeah, I am. I'm working on a book, and it's a memoir, and I don't know what will become of it. It's every time I write a book, it's like I never wrote a book before. It's completely terrifying. It's not like I now feel more confident. I just keep showing up. That's all. And I thought that writing a memoir might be a little easier for me than fiction, because I actually don't feel like fiction is my comfort zone, maybe. Um, I've written a lot of essays, so like personal essays, you know, that have appeared here and there. I mean, not a ton, but I usually find writing those fairly easy. And I thought maybe writing the memoir will be more like that. Not so much. And it's like a dump truck of every memory you ever had dumps on you in places, and they can't all go in there. And then also you get to places you're like, I don't actually remember anything about my life. It's a blur. I just have this overarching feel for it, and that doesn't work either. So anyway, I'm working on a memoir, and we'll see what happens.
Well, best wishes on it. It sounds I'm sure you'll have a lot of readers if you ever go to publish it. I'm sure there's a
Thank
lot of
you.
folks on this event who will be eagerly awaiting it. That's very exciting.
Thanks.
Of course. We have quite a few reader questions, so I'm going to turn there for a bit now.
Awesome.
One of our first questions, it was asked a while ago in the chat. They were curious, this reader was curious about whether you saw yourself in Sky at all. That it seemed like you mentioned that you knew who Sky was right away. Was she familiar to you in any way, or yourself as a child?
Um, that's a good question. Not so much that I was aware of. Um, I could only things that like Sky loves to be outside. I always love to be outside. Sky is creative, and I was creative, but she just seemed to be her own person, one of those awesome kids that is so fun to get to know. But and while I felt like I liked her and had things in common with her, no, I don't think I particularly saw myself, or I certainly didn't like cast back within myself to try to create her. She always had her own thing to say. She easily stepped up on stage and was herself. If that makes
Excellent.
sense.
Yeah, it sure does. Uh, Another sort of setting related question. Someone was curious about, they said, well, they were reading it, they were really picturing Grand Marais because they must have been to Grand Marais before. Um, they were curious about how different the setting in the novel is, from your actual, the area where you live or where you intended for the story to be set.
Um, I think it's similar. When I wrote Tin Camp Road, I thought of Galleon, the little town, as being even smaller than Grand Marais, really, and a bit more remote than Grand Marais. Really, Grand Marais is, if anything, I placed it in a non-existent area between Grand Marais and where I live. Just kind of, I'm always. It's a tough decision as a writer or for me. It's a tough decision, like to use real places or to create imaginary places. And I mix that. Like there's real places in the book. There's Sault Ste. Marie and there's Marquette and Escanaba. And then I mix in these not real places like Galleon and McAllister. And I just, when I'm writing, maybe because I live here, I don't want to be held to like, but there's not that street in Grand Marais and so on and so forth. But certainly it has a lot in common with here.
Definitely. There was another question in the chat that's somewhat similar. They were curious about, because it's, Galleon is not an actual city, but has there been any perception from your own community of like, that was anyone upset by sort of any
Oh, that's a good
depictions
question.
that they might have thought were, of your own community?
If they were, I didn't hear about it with Tin Camp Road. But then with Tin Camp Road, it came out kind of a little bit more towards the end of my time there. I don't, I didn't hear about it. With South of Superior, not people in Grand Marais with South of Superior, which was much more so received as like, this is Grand Marais. And I'm like, no,
Mhm.
it isn't, but, but it's real similar. The response from my community to South of Superior was, as far as I know, like overwhelmingly positive. I worried about that a bit, but then they just seemed to really embrace the way that I had told the story. For the most part, the UP seems to have really embraced the way I've tried to convey.
That's very cool.
And I think my nature is to be, I'm a pretty peaceable person, and I think a pretty measured person. I really try hard to see different sides of any story. So, and I think a fairly gentle person most of the time. So I work hard not to, I probably maybe work too hard to not say things that would offend people. Um, I don't know.
Fair enough. There are a couple of stories or questions here about sort of the characters and the different events in the plot of Tin Camp Road. So the first one, they said, there's definitely a feel, especially when Laurel and Sky lose their place, that, there's this conflict or at least disconnect between those who are sort of investors and local residents. So it seems like they, those investor folks, they maybe want to help, or they may be sympathetic characters, but maybe just don't really fully grasp the challenges in life of those who are longtime residents. They were curious about sort of, did you intend that to be sort of a way for us to understand Laurel and sort of her own self-determination? What was sort of the role of bringing that voice into the story?
I think that it's true that a lot of long-term residents whose whole life is based out of this economy have a real different perspective from someone who comes from away and maybe has more resources. And it's not that those people that come from away don't mean well or want to help, but it is harder. I think it is a lot harder for them to understand the realities, the day-to-day realities. I have a friend here who was raising her kids with she and her husband. And she said she just loves, I've heard her tell so many people, I love the book. It is so true. It was so hard for us as young parents, and you just don't see that anywhere. We weren't bad parents, and we couldn't have loved our kids more, but most people don't get the realities of everything being so tight. Everything was, so I wanted to show that, and there was no like judgment against those that are from away. It's just like, it's just so different. I don't know how to make you understand other than write a whole book to show you. I don't want to tell you, I just want to show you. I wanted to show, I guess I wanted to lift the window up a little bit so you could peek in from the outside and see this complex, fulfilling, complicated, wonderful, terrible life going on in a way that you never imagined life did go on. A little bit of that came from my experiences with South Superior, which took me out. I mean, I worked all the time, and I rarely left Grand Marais other than to visit family. But once it came out, I was doing talks around the state, and meeting a lot of people. It was great, but I was interacting with a lot of people who were from a very different lifestyle than the UP. And I remember someone saying that in South of Superior, they're like, I never imagined really the lives going on in those tiny little dumpy little houses all over. And I'm like, yeah, there's real people here, living. So and it wasn't, they were these readers from different perspectives. They weren't bad people. I wasn't angry at them. It's just like, you don't know what you don't know. So I just wanted to lift up a window pretty gently so that you could peek in and you could see the tough and the great, and just see it. See a different way of life.
We had a reader who was interested in if you could talk a little bit about Laurel and Jen's relationship. Like, they seem like they're pretty mad at Jen, and she wasn't their favorite character. So if you could just talk a little bit about their relationship and the significance to the story.
Poor Jen, man. She's the bad guy. She is. And she reminds me of friendships that I've had that aren't the most healthy friendships. But boy, she's been through her own stuff. And I really needed a bad guy in the book I needed a foil. And poor thing, she had to step into that role and take all the hate. And I don't hate Jen myself personally. I have so much sympathy for her too. And I just feel like I would like to, it's like she too is a real person. And I'm sure she would never forgive me for what I did to her in this book, but I'd like to go and apologize and say, I know you're a complex person that went through so much of your own stuff to make you who you were. And when she was calling out to Laurel for help and at inappropriate times, she needed that help, man, and I was quite ruthless about making her into the bad guy because I really needed a bad guy. But I have seen in my own life friendships that were like that, and I wish that I maybe had stood up for myself a little sooner. And I based a lot of the relationship on that feeling of mine, like, mine never resulted in a disaster, but what if they had? any person will know how hard it is to say no to a friend who's calling you. Even if you're like, I've been telling you not to do this shit anymore. But you're not going to not go, maybe, no matter how dangerous. I mean, you make tough choices, and sometimes it's only in retrospect that you can see how disastrous they were.
Right. Right. Another sort of character related question that we've gotten from a couple of our a couple of readers is sort of about the reveal about Sky's dad at near the end. So tell us a little bit about that. Did you always know that's where it was coming, and who, tell us a little more about how that came about.
That was kind of fun to write, the reveal about her dad. And yes, I always suspected it was coming to that. And part of it was because, and as a writer, as the author, you have a lot of power. There's times when the characters, you have to do what the story wants. Like I had to crucify Jen. I'm not a good enough. I mean, I tried to do it in a balanced way. I try to never write one-dimensional characters, whether the good guys or the bad guys, but I really didn't show her in a flattering light. And so you have a lot of power. And from the beginning, I was worried about Sky. And even in their new incarnation at the end of the book, it's not like Sky and Laurel are still in super stable circumstances. And you never know. What if Sky were to get sick or something? What would happen? I mean, Laurel, what would happen to Sky? So from the beginning, because I don't do well with suspense. I don't like horror films. I don't like a lot of conflict. I can't take it, man. I was like, I want Sky to be okay. So I had in my mind that if her dad was in the area, that would be helpful, that it would give her to have another blood relative or two would be a good thing. So I did have in my mind that it would work out that way. I was worried that it was too cheesy. But I also thought, he's got family in the area and population is such up here that I could see them running into each other at a tavern, kind of in the middle of nowhere and then stumbling across each other again a decade later. It could happen. There's not that many people up here, so I did. And I in many ways, I just chose it because I thought I just want her to have her dad in her life too. I want her to have more support system.
Very cool.
So I arranged it.
Yeah, absolutely. One of our readers asked about, in the book, Sky is 10. If you were to sort of peer into a crystal ball for those two characters, what do you think their relationship, Laurel and Sky's relationship, will be like when Sky's a teenager?
That's a great question. I do not know. The romanticized doesn't like conflict Ellen would like to say, oh, it's going to be just great. But reality and knowing teenagers and knowing I think it's going to be fine in the long run, no matter what happens. But I think teenagers are teenagers and Sky is so independent that there's bound to be some conflicts. I think it would be very unrealistic if there were not. I had a very close relationship with my mom and very little conflict throughout. So it doesn't have to happen. But on the other hand, and I had a very close relationship with my dad. I love and admire my dad. I always did, but I warred with him as a teenager. I mean, it was like gasoline and matches. So my mom was always the peacemaker. And if it had just been me and my mom, would it have been her that I warred with? Because don't teenagers have to war with somebody, So I don't know, that's a good question. But in the long run, I know that it's going to be just fine. For myself, even though I had warred with my father, I never didn't love him. And before he died, we had actually become like friends, pals. So I got through my awful teenage years. Sky will also.
Absolutely. We all do, right?
Too.
Before I turn it over back to my colleague Jackie to wrap us up, I just had, we have had such wonderful questions and we are so grateful for your time here. I just wondered, this was such a great novel that so many of our readers enjoyed. And you said you are a big reader. Do you have any books that you'd like to recommend to any, any favorites that readers should check out?
Gosh, I have so many that's like I'm like a deer in the headlights. Um, there's oh golly, I really am.
Well, South
There's
Superior for sure. I think everyone's adding that to their
so
library
many,
list right now.
there's so many great books, and we're gonna be done, and I'll have like a list as long as both of my arms. But one book that I love a lot of nonfiction books, and I love a lot of older books. So there's a book by a woman called Mildred Walker that was called The Southwest Corner. I think it was published in the 40s. I absolutely love that book. I loved a book called The Forest Lover. Can't even remember the author, but it was like a historical fiction, like about an artist. Loved that book. I love a book called The Orchard, a memoir. There's a novel called The Orchard too, which I haven't read, but The Orchard, a memoir, was also written in the 40s. So these are books you might not have heard of. I guess that's why I'm trying to, there's so many books that everyone that are current, that are great, that people have probably been exposed to. But those are a few of my favorites. The Orchard, a memoir, was written by Adele Crockett Robinson. I've read that book probably 6 or 8 times.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I'm going to turn it over now to my colleague Jackie, but I just want to say thank you for the wonderful conversation. I really enjoyed it.
Oh, me too. And thank you all. And thanks for the great questions. And thanks for having me and for reading.
All right, everybody. I'm here to wrap us up. Thank you so much, Ellen, again, for just such a thought-provoking conversation about this book. I know all of our audience members were really enjoying this. Thank you, Amber. Thank you to all of our audience members as well. I would like to give you all a reminder that we will be posting the recording of this on Bridge, Michigan this week. It will show up on our events page as well as on our new app, and the events page on that new app. Culture Club events are held every other month, so please do stay tuned for our next event in April. And the reminder here is that if you'd like to be eligible to receive our next Culture Club selection, consider becoming a Bridge Club member today. Thank you all again, and have a wonderful day.
Thank you, everyone.